get into it, bro. So Mitchell Thompson, you got your podcast. What's the name of the podcast?
Post-workout podcast.
Post-workout podcast. That's what's up. So tell us a little bit about that, your journey to getting into it, and then I definitely want to get into combat cardio, which is a new venture for you as of what, like 4 months ago?
November, so 3 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right on. So yeah, give us a little background on who you are. Can you also do DNA coaching for Prime, which is one of my companies that I'm a partner in. So yeah, fill us in. Who is Mitchell?
Well, first off, I appreciate you having me, brother. It's long
Absolutely.
overdue. So I qualify myself as a health professional, mainly because I used to be a personal trainer. With all of my clients, we would always have real deep mental and emotional conversations after our workouts, especially when it's in a one-on-one setting. And I eventually transitioned with combat cardio to be more of a class-based setting. So I kind of went from the one-on-one to more of the class-based. But in the one-on-ones, I would have these conversations with my clients that ultimately we would call post-workout conversations. And so the post-workout podcast was documenting a lot of those deeper conversations that me and my clients would have that we both agreed. And by we both, I mean, it didn't matter which client I was talking to. We would always agree, imagine how many people this could help if this was documented, if we were able to actually like get this conversation out to the world. And so the post-workout podcast started under that sort of guise.
Okay.
And that was way before combat cardio. That was like 2020 to 2023. I haven't done it in a while, but I'm jump starting it back up. Combat cardio has been my recent venture outside of Prime, obviously, which we'll get to Prime too. And combat cardio is essentially what I consider the best form of aerobic training. High intensity interval training has been proven. I could bust out all the studies and show you, but it's been proven to be the most effective form of endurance training with the optimization of your time. I think there was a Harvard study done where you had half of these cross-country athletes doing a form of just basic endurance training where they would train, called it road work, for 60 to 90 minutes at a heart rate of 70% to 80%. And they had the other group doing high-intensity interval where they kept their heart rate at 85% plus, and they only did it for 30 minutes to 60 minutes. And it was really around that 40-minute median range. And they showed that the group that did the high-intensity interval training had better results in their overall cross-country performance than the group that did the traditional road work.
Interesting.
And so stuff like that for me was like, well, you two birds, one stone. You get to do a more effective form of training, and it takes less time.
Sure.
And with my personal training, I always utilized boxing and kickboxing as my mode of aerobic training. And it was, again, more of the endurance aspect of just getting their cardio endurance better overall. But the mental and emotional came with it, and punching and kicking things out was just this stress relief that I noticed was more effective than having them do rows or having them do elliptical work or having them do just basic body weight training, you know?
Yeah.
And combat cardio was essentially birthed from that form of personal training that got scaled into something more class-based rather than it being one-on-one.
Well, the interval training is not just specific to cross country. That was the way you guys were looking at
it.
But
Well, no, they cross country was their just form of training. They just took cross country athletes. They then took those athletes and said, one of you is going to do the same training you've been doing for endurance-based training, which is just 70% heart rate to 80%, where they took the other group and said, no, we're going to have you guys do a different form called high-intensity interval training, where you're essentially keeping your heart rate at 85% plus of your VO2 max to see which one would yield better results. And so they took athletes across the similar field of practice, which was just cross country in this particular study. And it showed that the high intensity interval group that did that performance training had better results in the end.
I got you.
Yeah.
In 16 and 17, I was working with Matt Porter when I was getting ready for my bodybuilding competition for nationals. And he incorporated interval training for my cardio. And it sucks. It's not fun at all, especially when you're depleted, you're in a caloric deficit, like it blows. But the thing is the reasoning behind it for a bodybuilder is steady state for a lot of guys. Especially if you let it go in the off season and you get softer than you should, they're killing themselves generally on like a stepper for, 2 sessions and 90 minutes a day. Well, steady state cardio, a lot of those guys to get lean would lose tissue in the process. A lot of them they say they lose their legs. And so the benefit of interval training is it's muscle sparing. So you're going to get the cardio benefit, the heart rate benefit, but you're not going to lose tissue, or in theory, you're not going to lose tissue.
Exactly.
But nobody wants to do it at that state because it's terrible. I did it when I was working with him. I haven't done it since, to be honest. But honestly, I didn't even have to do cardio for most of my shows. Because one, I have a super high metabolism, a hard gainer. And two, I was enhanced. And so those two elements didn't really require for me to cut that weight that hard.
But I think for you, what you mentioned, a big underlying morale of that whole concept of not doing the high intensity interval training was it sucked. It's hard.
It does.
But bro, that's why combat cardio or forms of combat training as your method or your outlet for that high intensity interval training, it compensates for the effort that's exerted with a level of fun that's also biomechanically efficient.
Well, yeah, boxing and kickboxing, hitting the back, that's more fun than being on a climber for an hour.
Way
right?
more fun, especially if you have trainers that are guiding you through the program every single day at your convenience, which those gyms just don't exist. Like that concept just doesn't exist. And so me bringing it to the table was something that it's in high demand without people even really knowing that it's there.
Right. So I guess probably the closest comparison would be what, a 9-round?
9-round title.
How do you guys differentiate yourself from 9-round?
Well, the main thing is we have actually qualified trainers in there.
Okay.
9-round just kind of hires anybody. We also are more functional based in the sense that we teach proper punching and kickboxing, boxing and kickboxing technique. Everything we do is centered around longevity. Most of these boutique gyms, whether it be 9-round, title, whatever, they have less of an incentive to actually implement practical fitness protocols because their business model in and of itself is already effective.
Yeah.
So they just need to get people sweating and feel like they're doing something. And what's funny is a lot of my realizing where 9-round and title were insufficient came from me being a general manager of 2 different 9-round locations.
Okay.
And I was being told by higher ups in the franchise that I'm not allowed to help clients with their nutrition. I'm being told I'm not allowed to help with specific dietary nutritional protocols. They have to just follow this templated franchise model that you have to limit with regards to implementing specificities because they're not qualified, right? Yeah. So I was being just shackled and I was having my arm held from being able to really get the members the results they deserved, to the point where by my leaving, I decided, you know what, one-on-one, I can definitely get a more effective, direct hands-on approach in getting my clients the results they expect, let alone the results they deserve.
I hear you.
And so what we mainly offer is not only the integration of practical functional fitness, mainly through postural correction, but we also offer specialized nutrition protocols that are gauged and customized to the individual member every time they sign up.
I got you. So a lot of times when these franchise models, and in defense of 9-round, they're just trying to make something
universal.
Scalable, right?
100%. Hey, bro, trust me, 100% I get it. I wholly understand the method behind their madness and why they were essentially shitting on my efforts, if we'll call it that. But at the end of the day, customer service is customer service. And when I'm already offering these customers this potential service and then it's being stripped from them, now they're having an expectation that's not being fulfilled because they were promised something they're now not able to get.
Okay.
And so I was having to now under-deliver to these members saying, remember when I told you I could write you a custom protocol? Now I can't do it. Otherwise, I'll get fired. I just can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the struggle, because that's kind of the point I'm at now. You know what I mean? Like, we're getting ready to build our 5th foundation, 24-hour gym. And, you know, to scale, you want to be able to replicate. So the member experience is, for the most part, universal at every location you go to.
Jinx, you owe me a soda.
But the struggle is growth without sacrificing quality.
Literally.
And that's what that's been my main driver. So that's, you take the points from the bigger, more corporate businesses, and you want to figure out what they're doing well, and then identify what isn't working as well when they try and scale that way, right?
100%.
And it sounds like you've identified that. Now your goal is going to be, as you grow, is to maintain that authenticity and uniqueness and customization for your clients, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where your hurdle is going to be. The funny thing, so you and I have been friends for a few years. you came on with Prime Recovery and Wellness, my health clinic, and you're doing DNA coaching. You went through all the certification,
certified epigenetics coach. Yep.
All the education on it. And I remember we were at my house, my home office, talking, and my concern was bandwidth, because you got a lot going on, and this was before you had started Combat Cardio officially.
Right.
And I told you, I was like, man, are you sure you got the time to handle this? Because, what I worry about with myself is, one, I say yes to too many things. I'm getting better about that. But we only have so much bandwidth. And we don't want to be like, I consider it like a all-in-one copy, printer, fax, whatever, right? I've had those machines, and they all do the features, or they all accomplish that task, but they don't do them well, right? So that's what I worry about with myself. Mm-hmm. And that's what I worried about with you too, because you've been a trainer, you've been independent before, but it's a whole nother level of entrepreneurship when you start a true company that has a physical location, you have staff, you have landlord commitments, all that stuff. And I remember you and I were talking about it and thinking to myself, I was like, I know exactly where you're at. Mm-hmm. And, there's nothing I could have told you to prepare you for it, right? It's always harder than you expect. It always takes more than you expect. There's roles in running that company that you probably never envisioned. Like, I never thought about, I just wanted to open gyms, right? Because I dig it. I love bodybuilding. Mm-hmm. And I get fulfilled by being around that, right? But I never knew I was going to have to be a leader to 82 staff. Man. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And you know what? I can lead myself pretty well. I'm a really disciplined guy for the most part. But nobody's ever accused me of being an excellent communicator. And when you have to run people, you got to learn to communicate. And, most for my staff, I want them to adapt to my leadership style. But you're dealing with 82 different personalities. And some of them need a little bit of a different approach. Some things I can be very frank with certain staff. And others I have to really watch what I say, because I'll hurt their feelings really quick. And it's strictly business. But I got to sometimes bring myself back to reality, like, hey, you can't be so cut and dry all the time with them. Tell them, here's what the expectation is, and leave the conversation. Sometimes you got to work through these problems. And, I think you were a few months in, and we were talking about other business, and you were expressing some frustrations and whatnot. And I literally, I was smiled and laughed, not because I was delighting in your struggle,
no, but because
I was like, you know what I'm talking about now, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody can work hard, everybody can push to accomplish things, but it's just a different level when you start a company like what you've done, what I've done, and you just can't explain it till you get into it. And I was smiling and laughing, not because I thought it would stop you, because I was like, man, he knows exactly what it takes, and it's going to, those hurdles, you're going to overcome one and there'll be another. That's just how it goes. But welcome to the world of business ownership, entrepreneurship, and like I said, you just don't get it until you live it. And it's like same thing with bodybuilding. I can prep a guy for his first show, but until he breaks curtain, I can't explain that experience for him. Right. It's something you have to go and experience. And next time you're going to be like, man, I'm going to do it this way because I learned this. And there's just certain things that your friends or advisors, they're just not going to be able to explain to you because there's no real words for it, because it's so specific to the situation. And I think you guys are doing well. I think it's going well. Oh, yeah. But I think your bandwidth has been restricted more than you expected.
Way more.
Right? And I think that there's things that have come about, I know, that you didn't foresee as being a hurdle that has come something you just have to address. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it stops you.
At all.
No, and that's what really that's when most people turn back. Most people, they want to fantasize, and they actually never pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tell guys a lot, too. I'll tell them, set a certain amount of time to where you can plan. Get your business plan, get everything ready, plan. Say you give yourself 3 months, 4 months. You mark that date down, and no matter how much growth you've had in that time, you launch no matter what. Because if you don't have that hard launch date, you're going to constantly be planning. Planning is great, but it can't go on forever. Literally. Right? There's going to be so many of these things where you have to react in the situation and come to a conclusion on how to solve that problem. What I'll also say is, what I tell all my staff is, try and be as proactive rather than reactive, because it gives you a lot more time to handle the problem. Mm-hmm. You're going to come up with a better solution. and you're not going to be having people stressed out, freaking out. What do we do here? So anytime you can be more proactive than reactive, that's the way to do it. But that's in a perfect world, and we don't live in one of those. Right. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you're going to have to be reactive at certain times, and that's going to determine how well you do is how you handle pressure. 100%. How much pressure can you take? That's what it comes down to 100%. When it comes to business ownership. And you, like me, try and do a lot more than just one thing. And it's doable, but you almost have to have an unbalanced focus.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and for you, you're fairly recently engaged, so you're getting ready to start that family too. So you have another hurdle on the horizon,
100%.
And they're great. That's an amazing path to be on.
For sure.
Like I'm proud of you for it. I hope to have that sometime myself, but it's never going to stop. And
I don't know if I ever want it to stop though, because I think that's what gives us that perpetual motivation and that perpetual goal to constantly be striving towards. Because if you don't have a goal to strive towards, you're just going to find complacency.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that there is this median line of neutrality. I believe in life, you're either progressing or you're regressing. And if it's not that you've got to be perfect in your progression forever. I mean, you're going to have days where you're going more down than you are up, and that's okay. But you got to have more days where you go up than you have days where you go down. And that's where you're in then a perpetual state of progress, constantly chasing some goal rather than being like, I've achieved everything I want and I'm just going to sit back and relax. Like I don't find comfort anytime I thought I've achieved a goal, just sitting in that goal's achievement. I've always found an immediate pursuit of what's next anytime I've achieved something. So,
yeah. Same.
100%.
For me, if I'm not making progress, I'll get depressed.
And I think there's some poetic play on words there that we could discover, you know? Well,
and you know what? Like society glamorizes just like the workhorse, get it done, never stop. Like and I get that too. But it's not all good. I understand the way I live my life isn't something that is going to serve me well forever. You know what I mean? Like in the Bible, Paul, when he's in prison, you know, Paul used to have wealth, leadership, prestige, and then basically when he came to Christ, all that went away. Mm-hmm. And when he was in prison, he says, you know, I've learned to, paraphrasing, I know what it means to have much or everything. I know what it means to have nothing. And what I've learned is to be content in both situations. And so I'm trying to actively apply that stuff to my life now because, you know, I'm not necessarily enjoying the journey because I'm always trying to get to the next one, right? And so I'm trying to get a little more balance in that regard so I can appreciate the wins that are happening on a daily basis and not necessarily it's just the end goal. So what I tell my staff is I said, I don't expect perfection out of you. I expect excellence. And they're very different because excellence requires failure. Yeah. Excellence is going to you're going to have some missteps. Whereas perfection, you better get it right the first time, every time, or that's not perfect. You know, none of us are perfect. And that's just not reality.
Nor will we ever be.
Exactly. And you're going to set yourself up for extreme disappointment if you're planning to be perfect, right? So I think that's a good way, and I try and consider that in my own life and business is like, I'm going to be as excellent as I possibly can and understand that there's going to be wins and losses. And not the biggest win and the worst of the worst losses, neither one of them are permanent, and that shouldn't dictate my state, right? Easier said than
way
done.
Easier said than. I'll give you an example. Earlier, you were alluding to the idea of there's a reason why majority of business entrepreneurs inevitably fail. Bro, I went to Mizzou 2 years ago and spoke to the CEO organization. I can't remember what it stands for, but the idea, it's an organization for, I think it was the Columbia Entrepreneurs Organization, something like that. And it's a bunch of entrepreneurs. And I went down there pretty much telling them there's a 90% chance the majority of you guys are going to fail because of the statistical probability of just any business entrepreneur chasing their dream. Mm-hmm. The statistic is quite literally 90% of businesses will fail, which alludes to that only 10% of them are going to succeed. I was essentially giving them the statistical deduction of why certain businesses fail and the variables that we can define that actually qualify their failure. And the majority of those businesses, 90% of them that fail, is due to a lack of preparation. And I think what you said was so perfect is you got to prepare. You got to be proactive. You got to be pretty much ready for any outcome or possibility to manifest right in front of your face, so you can attack it with a level of preparation pre-hand, so you're not surprised by any one given thing thrown in your direction.
Right.
And again, it's like, I'm saying this to all these entrepreneurs down in Mizzou 2 years ago. So as soon as I'm preparing to open up my own business, especially something like you said, that's more of a brick and mortar, that's completely different than my previous business in self-sustained training, which was essentially just my consulting, my health professional, whether it was my personal training or just my consultations, whether I was doing one-on-one trainings with people or I was actually meeting with them in my office for the more lifestyle sort of life coaching. That wasn't anywhere near as entrepreneurially implicating as the variables you listed, which is having obligations to a landlord, having to pay employees, which at this point in time, I'm not as scaled to the point as you are where it's as implicating, right? But not that far off, especially if I want to get to the point of having multiple locations. So what am I doing? I'm making sure I'm already creating the standard operating procedures of not only the educational backing that every trainer should have, but also the base educational combat from a combat sports and from a personal training standpoint in terms of bare minimum expectations already preemptively in a curriculum. That way, when that time comes, I've done my preparation. So I found me having less stress in the face of what would have otherwise been insurmountable stress because of the level of preparation when coming to that inflection point.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, the preparation still, and you know this, it still doesn't negate from the energy involved in having to, in your words, the bandwidth involved, having to actually act on all of these different endeavors. But man, I can't tell you how much relatively easier it is because of my proactive preparation before any of these things even manifest in front of my face.
Well, just in regard to payroll that you mentioned, when you were managing 9 Round, you knew you're getting paid on this day,
right,
every month or bi-weekly, something like that. Your personal training, you know, you're running your own show, you're your own, you know, instructor, so you know about what you're getting paid. Now you have staff, and, you know, it still is a pain point for me too, because as we scale, we need more qualified people. But when it comes to payroll, I'm proud. We've never missed payroll one time for my staff. That doesn't mean we're getting paid.
Preach.
All of a sudden, it goes from, you know, you were guaranteed a paycheck at 9 Round. You knew what your income was going to be when you were training. Now you have to make sure everybody else eats before you do.
But that's, Matt, that's what makes you in the immediate 10% of those successful business owners. When I went down and talked to those college kids at Mizzou, you have, and I'd be curious to know where this comes from for you. Like, where did you understand that it's not about making a business, isn't about immediately paying yourself first and gratifying yourself first. It's about making sure the empire, the product, is as solid as possible, and then you worry about yourself on the back end. Like, right. For you, how did you come to discover that?
It's probably through general contracting.
Okay.
Because I literally I had my own crew. You know, for the first few years, I worked with my guys. We framed, you know, set windows, doors, tile, all that stuff. But there's electrical that has to be subbed out. There's plumbing that has to be subbed out. Certain things that I just can't do myself. And those are contracts that I have with those subcontractors, which I've committed to pay them. So that I was contractually obligated, one. But even my guys that work for me, I know that they're the true lifeblood of what I'm doing. I can't do this all by myself. And they're not going to understand they did the work they expect to be paid.
Right.
And they're not the one that's starting the company. It's me. So that just falls on you. Now, I've seen it done the other way.
But that's why, but that to me, the fact that that's even like, even through your contracting work, the fact that you were able to see it that way versus the other way you're about to describe, that isn't that intuitive from what I've seen from business, from even some successful business owners who, because the product was so good, they were able to get away with their malfeasance in their business practice, meaning paying themselves more than they ever probably should have when they could have built the product to be better. That's something that I've noticed is common amongst the most successful, but is rare amongst the common entrepreneurs on their way up.
It ultimately boils down to delayed gratification.
Delayed gratification.
We talk about it a lot. It's almost cliche the way people speak about it anymore, but it's true. You know, especially when you're running the show, you know what your budget is. You know how much you can borrow if you need to borrow. You can only do that so many times. But the more you can compound, like reinvest in your own business.
Right. But that's it though. You're smart enough, bro. And that's where, like, did you have any, because like me having you to be able to cross-reference with a lot of the, especially just being in the domain of like gym, whether my gym's more boutique, so it's something that I feel like complements any commercial gym like the Foundation, right? I always wonder to what capacity who you may have had in your corner to give you that sort of insight, because I had to learn that tangentially through good business owners that I met off happenstance. So my buddy I grew up with, his family has a very successful business in northern Missouri that is essentially family owned and it's generational. And they essentially employ their whole town up north, and their entire model is operated off of that completely, which is make sure everybody's paid first, make sure they're taken care of first, and then we'll worry about what we have on the back end. Sure. Invest back into the business, invest back into the product, solidify it before you can solidify yourself as somebody who's making money in that field.
I think it's your approach to it too. For me, I was never wanted to build this, sell it, unload, or turn and burn after a year. Like, I knew this is a long-term play for me. I plan on doing this for the next 30 years, right?
Smart, okay.
So I knew that I had to add value in any way I can. And a lot of, especially early on, and even now, if I take big risks, well, if I utilize a lot of resources, it's limited. So I may have to at some point go back. I've sold more than once. I've sold everything I've owned to stay afloat.
Right.
I did that early on. You know, when I first started out in construction, it was 2000 into 2006, and I was hitting home runs. It was awesome. I was like, this is the easiest money. I mean, I worked hard, but I was like, this is always going to happen.
Right.
So I built a house. My first place that I built a house, two of my buddies moved in with me. We lived there 6 months. I bought a lot, 2 more lots next door, and I sold the house we were in, and I moved us into a better house. And then I was like, man, this is going great. I bought a Porsche. I bought a monster truck and a crotch rocket. I had a theater in my house. That was me being immature and not, I was spending pretty much everything I made. And that's a common mistake in a lot of young guys.
So you learned a lot then just by your own experiences.
Well, that was 2006, 2007, and then the real estate crash came, right? And I was like, wow, I didn't save any money. And there's other guys in the construction business that had apartment complexes with 200 doors that they were getting killed with interest, right? So the blessing for me was I was almost too small to fail. I only had a couple houses going, and but I still didn't have a lot of money coming in. In construction, you get paid a few times a year every time you move a property. So I was building spec houses initially, and if that sold in a timely fashion, I made great money. If it went for months and months and months and sell, I made almost nothing.
Right.
Sometimes I didn't make any money at all. I actually lost money paying the realtor to sell it. Right. And so when the recession happened, guess what went? The Porsche, the monster truck, and the crotch rocket. But you can't become attached to those things. One thing that I think has helped me is I've always really put efficiency as my number one when it comes to business. And that's not getting the lowest price so you can keep your costs down. That is getting the best contractor and considering how well he's going to do the job, what he's pricing at, and how long it's going to take him. It's not one of the 3 variables. It's all 3 meshed together, and then you have to determine which makes the most sense, right? So that, for me, just proceeding with efficiency and things like that. Also, I didn't have any partners. I just, to get to point A to point B, I just had to figure out what was the most efficient path to it. Like I said, it doesn't mean it was the fastest way to get there.
Right.
It's the most efficient route in that it'll be profitable, we'll get better, the quality of the product will be great. Instead of, I can get there in 60 days if I do this, but, that's only going to save me time. I'm still not vetting enough subs. I'm paying more than I should. And the subs I'm getting, they're not as good as they should be. So we're having to come back and redo their work, things like that. It's true with anything, not just business, but life. understanding what efficiency is from a full perspective, not just from a dollar perspective or a time perspective. And that's what's helped me a lot, is trying to be. Now, granted, I didn't have a franchise model to go off of. You don't either with combat cardio. So that's why a lot of people get into these franchises, because here's the playbook,
right?
Do this. And that can be one huge peace of mind, because you don't have to figure it all out.
I'm going crazy having to reperceptualize how to create a curriculum for the things that I thought I already knew. It's like, let me teach my brother and sister how to teach posture. Step 1. Well, we got to talk about anterior pelvic tilt. Well, before we talk about that, we got to talk about how the rectus femoris is overactivated. And it's just this like, oh my goodness, if I just had a franchise where I didn't have to think about the curriculum and everything that was entailed with creating it, let alone implementing it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Well, for me with the gyms is exactly the same. So when I got out of college, right before I graduated, like most seniors, I waited till my senior year to figure out what I was actually going to do. I started out in engineering, but I was also Air Force ROTC.
Oh, nice.
And I was working. My parents paid for my college, but outside of that, it was all on me, which was a huge blessing, because I got out of college without debt, right? But I realized quickly that I didn't have the bandwidth or the passion for engineering. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I switched to business. I got a degree in business, and I was really into bodybuilding. About my freshman, sophomore year, I got super into bodybuilding. It was great for me. I quit drinking like I was partying hard before that. I was a country boy growing up. We used to start drinking at like 14, right? But got into my early 20s, I realized, hey, I can't treat myself that way and be successful in bodybuilding. So that was a blessing there. But so when I got out of school, or getting ready to get out of school, I was like, I want to open a gym. And I was like, man, the best gym I know of is Gold's. So I looked into Gold's. And at this time, I believe what they told me was you needed $400K in liquidity. And, bro, I didn't have $4K in liquidity. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so I was like, well, all right, I got to do something so I can make this happen at some point. And I thought, I should consider building my own locations. I can add value that way.
And how old were you at this time?
Well, I was in college. I was a fifth-year senior. So, gosh, I don't know. Mid-20s.
20-something. Okay.
Yeah. And so I realized, okay, I still want to do the gym stuff, but obviously I don't have the resources to pull it off right now, nor was I qualified to do so. So then I started working construction, and I built fences on the back of these contractors' houses for a while.
Were you just like entry level in construction?
Oh, God. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I built things growing up a little bit.
But the idea of you were able to be prepared, if we're talking about the preparation for the inevitable, being the general contractor by having worked from the ground up, seeing all layers of what that job entailed.
Yeah, so it was a means to an end, really.
For sure.
I like construction, but it's crazy stressful.
Oh, my goodness.
And I like to do a good job for my clients. I started out with spec houses. I got into custom homes. Then I evolved into commercial real estate.
Custom homes must have been super stressful.
Well, and they were high end too.
So they want what they want.
Well, and some of the clients are great, but some of them aren't. Like
when you're paying that much money.
I built I don't remember exactly, like a $1.5 million home for Jeff Mitty, the Kansas State's girls basketball coach.
Okay.
I built something for another custom home for a professor. Both of these are around the golf course. And yeah, with custom homes, nobody else wanted to do it because it's reinventing the wheel. Right. Literally, one of the houses I built on the exterior had no 90-degree corners. Everything was round. Everything was radius.
Oh, my goodness.
That means the foundation has to be radius, the walls have to be radius, the windows have to be radius, the guttering has to be radius, the roof turret,
My goodness.
So yeah, it was reinventing the wheel, literally. And I understand why a lot of guys don't do that. But one client, I use a metaphor of you take them out shopping for a Corvette and they see a Lamborghini.
And now they
want the Lamborghini, but they wanted the Corvette price, right?
Right.
So for me, it's got to the point where it was really hard to keep my stress level down, give the client what they needed and wanted, and also pay myself.
For sure.
So then I started doing more commercial stuff, and I started doing more projects for myself. But when it came to the gyms, I started that because I didn't have a good outlet. I was a WBFF pro, and I was up and coming in the NPC. And by the time I got done working with my crew, it was 6 o'clock. Oh, and the gym wasn't 24 hours. So some nights it closed at 7. Some nights it closed at 8. And I'd get there, pre-workout, already in the system, shake the door. I'd walk in and be like, hey, we're closing at 20. And I'd be like, dude. So honestly, that's one of the main drivers of why I started the gym.
Building a commodity that you wish you would have had when you were in a position that you didn't have it.
Yeah, and a lot of the best businesses come out of a necessity, need, right?
Necessity.
Exactly.
Preach.
So for me, I wanted to start the gyms, but I even reconsidered the Golds model. Still didn't really qualify, but I also thought, there's some things that I want to do that are different, and I'm going to go at this alone. Well, that means your first few years are going to be way harder than they would if you bought into a franchise. Okay, so your first 3 years are going to suck even more, probably times 10, because you're going to figure it out on your own.
Thanks,
if you have good advisors, that helps, but I didn't really have anybody. But long term, it's so much better.
Right.
You know what I mean? You don't have to really answer to anybody. You get to call your own shots, for better or worse.
Well, I was going to say, but what does that entail? That entails that the accountability will always ultimately fall back on you.
100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so there's definitely pros and cons to it. I think you need to consider, if you do want to start a business, how thick is your skin? What's your threshold of ability to handle stress? Because ultimately your success is going to come down to how well you handle your stress, and then how you execute while stressed. And I don't regret it at all.
Look where you're at, bro.
It's worked, right? Mm-hmm. But in the moment when you're going through that, you're just like, God, I just wish I knew the answers to all this stuff, so I didn't have to go around and do all this research constantly and learn from trial and error,
right?
Because that can be expensive too. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely pros and cons to both. I think long term, the people who can start their own thing, they're going to be pleased that they remain independent rather than going with a franchise, because ultimately you're going to reap more profits if you do a good job, and you're going to have less people to answer to, and you can customize things as you think are needed. Whereas in a lot, like, I don't know 9-Round super well, but it's a successful business, but they call a lot of the shots. Mm-hmm. What equipment you have, how you operate, what classes you have, all that. So
what exercises you do, what you're allowed to teach, all that.
Right. So for me, it's just like I feel like I know what's best for what I'm trying to do, and so I went at it that way. But I used construction. I didn't have any money when I built the first gym, but I got with a bank that was situation specific. They were trying to grow too, and they let me use my equity as my down money. So I have this blueprint of this gym. It says it's worth $1.5 million just for round math, and I can build it for $900,000. Okay, well, I have $600K in equity. If they're doing an 80% loan to value,
oh man,
I got like $400,000 that they would count towards my down. Mm-hmm. So when you don't have any money, that's a great situation.
Oh man.
And then so that worked, and I did what I said I was going to do with them, and as a result, they let me do another one. And every time I got better, I got more resources, and I was more efficient. And so I recompounded every single time.
Right.
And as long as the bank's getting their return and you do what you say you're going to do, they're going to keep backing you for the most part. For
sure.
Unless they switch. Like I have a lender, I work with a few now, but I have a lender that I've been with for 12 years, and they got bought out. And where they initially liked a lot of commercial real estate, this new bank ownership wants ag land, and they don't like commercial real estate. So you got to be able to pivot in those situations. Right. But I think you just got to get creative sometimes when it comes to how you get started.
Sure.
There's, like I've told you, there was 2 instances where I pretty much sold everything and literally was like eating beanie weenies for meals. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that really hurt me bodybuilding.
Oh yeah.
Because one, I didn't have the funds to buy all the nutrition that I needed, the supplementation, but 2, the stress and the bandwidth restriction as a result. So it's definitely not sunshine and rainbows. I would say it's 20% of sunshine and rainbows, 80% of eating a shit sandwich every day. For real.
I agree, bro.
Every day I wake up and I'm like, I'm taking damage today. I know I'm going to take damage today. Where's it going to come from? Right? So for me, the mornings are the most important because I identify where this damage is coming from. And
let's patch up this shit before it sinks.
Yeah. And that's 10% of it.
For sure.
But 10%, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You focus on the stuff that's not working, not necessarily on the stuff that is. You don't always want to do that. But there's you got to consider, be realistic to your best knowledge of what it is going to take to start.
How did you get Prime Recovery started? Where did that come into the fold?
Well, when I opened up my first gym here in Kansas City, I had a doctor friend who also owned an IV clinic.
Okay.
And he wanted to put one in the clinic there.
Gotcha.
Well, good guy. I like him. Good physician. But a lot of the doctors, they're not necessarily best businessmen. And that business ended up closing. But I always had in my mind, like, hey, I should have IV in here. I mean, a lot of the people are you're coming to the gym, you're some way, shape, or form health-minded, right?
Right.
And so I was like, all right. So when I built the Liberty location, what a lot of people don't know, and I haven't told anybody, I don't really care anymore, but I lived in that building for a year and a half, and nobody knew that. So there was a space in the back that was office, and it used to be a carpet store because I didn't build this one ground up. This is a remodel. And so we had to pull up all the demo carpet. They have all the displays out, right? So I just stacked carpet pad back in one of the offices, and I slept on it for 6 months. And it was good because, for one, it saved me money. I had my house in Manhattan, but this way I didn't pay rent for an apartment,
right?
Which would have probably been more comfortable. Well, definitely would have been more comfortable.
100%.
But on the flip side,
wouldn't have built that character though.
But I learned so much about the building. I mean, and it allowed me to work 18, 20-hour days and just go crash,
literally
get back up, and do it again. But you can learn a lot about a property, especially if it's not something you built. By just laying in silence, you hear things. This unit kicked on, this one didn't. The panel, I can hear it arcing. The things that when daily operations are going, you're just not going to hear that stuff. So I became a lot more in tune with the real estate.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the plus sides of it. But we got opened, and this was 2021, and everybody was trying to buy houses. And I was like, I got to get out of here. I've been living here for over a year. I was like, I got to move out of this building. Because the gym's going on. It's a 24-hour gym.
Right.
And I'm a light sleeper. And there'd be people in there 3 a.m. deadlifting. I wake up and like, what the hell? You know what I'm saying? So I was like, it was killing my sleep. It wasn't great for the relationship either. I was married at the time. And I don't know. I was also embarrassed that I lived in my building where I had operations. Looking back on it, it's kind of cool. But
bro, I'm gonna tell you this. I trained out of I rent my first apartment after being homeless in 2019. Me and my pops, for about 3 months together, were just living out of motels, we were kind of couch surfing between family members before we just started saying, you know what, let's both go stay out of hotels until we find out what we're gonna do. So we were just back and forth between essentially living with family and then living out of hotels. November 2019, it was Thanksgiving Day, while everybody else, if you remember in 2019, there was a snowstorm on Thanksgiving Day. We drove through Kansas during the snowstorm just to come back to Kansas City to stay at another Extended Stay America, which was the primary hotel we stayed at, for another 2 months until we finally got a place in January. And when we got this place, I immediately retrofitted my living room to be a gym. And so I started training all of my clients, which were at first all of my buddies. I started training all of them at a super discounted rate just to get the repetitions of being a coach, while simultaneously being able to have enough people to help me pay for my rent. But same sort of concept. I'd be upstairs. I'd have a client at 7 a.m. I'd run right downstairs, start training them, go back upstairs, hop on a phone call, virtual meeting, go back downstairs, just up and down, all within my domicile, though. So there are pros and cons, though, when I don't have deadlifting in the background waking me up as a light sleeper.
Yeah.
That's a different type of con, though.
I've lived out of 3 of the 4 gyms.
Okay.
This is the first one I haven't lived in. But you do what you got to do.
For sure.
I was able to really focus on what I was into. But by the time I was trying to move out of there, like I said, the market was flooded. Everybody was trying to buy houses after COVID. And one thing I did during that time is I got my real estate license, and I was a licensed contractor. So the house that I ended up buying, there was, I think, 14 offers, and mine wasn't the highest. But I had a few things going for me. One, I was my own agent. So I forfeited my commission to the deal.
Right.
And I told that to the agent. 2, I'm a GC, so I did my own inspections. I waived all inspections because I know what I'm looking for. And 3, I had a good relationship with the bank that we were doing basically a portfolio loan. And so they basically we make sure the title's clear, they put the money in my account, and then I pay them out. So I also called it a cash offer.
Gotcha.
So these guys and I would close in 3 weeks. I would waive all inspections, and there was no real estate commission to be paid to me. And so that beat out 3 other offers that were higher than mine. And it worked great. And I got into the house, and, you would think that life would get better, and it does in some degree, but it's just, that's just in the moment. As soon as that passes, there's other things that are going to come up. So I guess appreciate when things are going well.
Right.
But understand that everything's going to be temporary, wins and losses. And you got to just be willing to take it and not let it turn you down. Like, so many people get to an obstacle and it stops them in their tracks. It's okay to not have the answer. It's not okay not to find the answer, right? So your end goal can still be the same, but your path or vehicle to get there, you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to find another way or figure out the way through, under, over, or around, right?
Adaptation.
Yeah. And so I think if you can tolerate the stress and you're willing to learn how to figure it out, you don't have to know everything to start. You're never going to know everything to start. So don't think that you have to be perfect and ready to roll to the T 100%. You just got to get started. A lot of the time,
leap of faith.
Yeah, and hope it works out. And understand the odds aren't in your favor, but how much are you willing to sacrifice? One thing I see a lot of guys do. We were talking about getting paid last, right? Well, this is one reason why I haven't had partners. Is a lot of times you'll see partners get together, and they each want their salary. They each need to be paid, and they'll go out and they'll spend money that they probably shouldn't spend. And another thing, too, is if you do get a partner, always make sure that person, neither one of you, requires that business to cash flow for the first 6 months to a year for you to survive.
Don't depend on that. Yeah.
Exactly, because if that's the case, you're going to start pulling funds to maintain your lifestyle that really aren't there. They need to be spent on the business. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have a partner that understands the risk, and
doesn't share those same core values, that's a big piece.
Right. Mm-hmm. You have to everybody involved has to know that this isn't going to be something. Startups are never going to flow well right out the gate. I got the gyms to the point now where if I do it well, we cash flow within about 90 days. But that wasn't the way it was at the beginning. My first gym, I didn't make money for over 2 years. And luckily I had a good year in construction prior, so I was able to fund it.
Right.
But if I would have had a partner or myself, if I would have had to take a salary every month, it just wouldn't have worked at all. I don't know how I made it through anyways, and I didn't have that burden. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're starting up. I'm not saying don't do it. Be realistic and be willing to start once you at least have a certain amount of the groundwork going, because there's going to be times where you can be proactive, and there's going to be times where you have to be reactive and problem solve on the fly. They both are a requirement.
Right.
That's just the way it goes.
Tying this back into how you got started at Prime, was living in the Liberty location able to give you a confident schematics of how you could essentially retrofit that back area you used to live in into something that was a new fruitful venture?
Yeah, so I never really brought that full circle. With Prime, the initial location, that office space that I had lived in for a year and a half was about 1,500 square feet.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm not living here anymore. Do I turn this into gym space? I thought about turning it into an Airbnb. I was like, man, if other gym bro, if they could come live in the gym for a weekend, like how tight would that be? But I was like, I don't know if that's the best. And then I went back to IVs, and I was like, let's turn this into IV therapy. You still have to have medical professionals, at least at a minimum, like an EMT or somebody doing the IVs, right?
Right.
But another thing I learned on my very first location, there was a physical therapy clinic that wanted to lease space from me. They're like, it'd be great to have it in the gym. And I met the owner, and I said, all right, so how long have you been doing physical therapy on your own? He's like, oh, dude, I'm not a physical therapist. I just employ these guys. And that flipped a switch in my brain. I was like, man, I don't have to be a doctor to own a medical clinic.
Right.
And so that stuck with me a long time. You just have to employ the right people and get the right licenses. You got to do it right. We do not operate we're above board on everything.
You'd have to be to do what
it's
you guys
a long-term play. I'm not trying to push bend the rules. So
you can't when you're dealing with medication and allopathic medicine, bro.
100%. So then we got into the process. I was like, all right, so I gutted that space, started building it out. And as we were hiring doctors and nurses, I thought to myself, I was like, well, we have everything in place. Why are we just limiting ourselves to IVs? And that's why, but initially it was going to be IV, so I called it Prime Recovery and Wellness.
Right.
Well, I added the wellness afterwards because I was like, I've been doing hormone therapy for years at this point. I was like, well, we're already licensed to do all this. Let's do hormone therapy as well.
Smart.
Let's do aesthetics as well. Let's do Botox. Let's do, so that's how it just evolved. But I didn't know that when I started.
Of course not.
I just knew I had a space that was cool, that could, just already in a gym with a lot of like-minded people. I would want this. Let's do it. And then as I got more and more down the road, light bulbs start turning on as you get to the next level, and it's evolved into what it is. Mm-hmm. And it started at one location in Liberty. Now we're getting ready to build our third physical location, but we're in 47 states across the country doing telemedicine. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that when I moved out of that space. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So that's another thing where it's like, if I would have waited to figure all that out and then started, I never would have figured it out. Right. Because that's a result. Those answers, those epiphanies are a result of going through a process and perfecting the process as you go.
Right.
And so that circles back to, yes, get a plan, but start executing, because you can build a parachute on the way down. Now, it comes down to your threshold of stress.
Yeah, and your risk management.
Bro, it's tested me a lot.
Using that analogy, I think, is the best descriptor for stress management and risk tolerance when being an entrepreneur, is jumping out of a plane and having to build the parachute before you hit the ground.
100%. So for you, with your new venture, what's been the hardest thing that you've seen? And was that something you predicted would be a hurdle, or was it something that's like, oh, I didn't realize this is something that needs to be addressed and it matters?
I would say the construction of the curriculum. I would say really building a standardized operating procedure that is things I know I can do whenever I'm in the gym working with somebody, whether it's in a class setting or one-on-one, and standardizing that in a way to where it can be taught and relayed to underlings that can then implement it to a similarly efficient, if not better degree. Like, that's what I'm noticing is so hard, is I'm having to go back and dive back into the studies of things and relearn a lot of the science of like physiology and sports science. And like that for me has been the part that I didn't think was going to be as necessary. I was like, well, I already know enough about. That was like any doctor, right? I'm not saying I'm a doctor, but like most experts, or if you're dealing with medicine, most doctors, the reason why they get stuck in their allopathic approach and they don't think about lifestyle a lot of the time is because in their mind they go, I've already made it. So there isn't this necessity for continued education. And I didn't even realize, to a degree, I had adopted that in sports and physiology, in sports science and physiology in particular, in kinesiology. I figured that posture and fixing posture and properly integrated movements was really the key and was the as far as you need to go in sports science, because we don't really have a lot of data on it right now. And so I didn't think when getting into this business that I'd have to get back into that way of thinking, which made me realize how much I still have to learn. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is the continued education piece.
So continued education, so you can pass that down to your staff, right? So literally. It's continuing education, but also managing people.
Mm-hmm. Leadership.
Managing people is probably the hardest aspect, because I have a few different businesses. Yeah, so like I said, the first Prime we did up north in Liberty, and scaled massively. And now, with the telemedicine stuff, we're doing DNA testing, coaching, hormone therapy, medical weight loss, peptides, right? But you came on last year as a DNA coach for us. Tell us a little bit about what the DNA tests are and how you're handling that as a coach.
So DNA testing, especially with regards to where I feel like I have more of a leverage as a coach, has to do with a concept known as nutrigenomics. So DNA coaching, or the DNA test itself, is going to give you a wide variety of just DNA markers that you're going to have genetic presusceptibility to towards a myriad of lifestyle decisions, whether it's food, whether it's ways of exercise, sleep, stress, all of these things. And the nutrigenomics part is the thing I like to hyper-focus on for people when deciding what foods and what specific combinations of foods are going to react appropriate to their genetic predisposition. And that's in the science known as epigenetics, which again, specifically with the nutrition is nutrigenomics. And so when I came on board, that was like the main thing that I had proposed to you was, well, I mean, I was first asked with if it was something I'd be interested in with regards to me already having the coaching background in all things nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle fundamentally. But then it came down to really deciphering how genetics plays a role, namely with how new this concept is within the last 10 years. Because the science of nutrigenomics is only as up to date as the technology has been surrounding it. And the technology has only been around for a few decades and in a substantial way the last 10 years. And we now have the ability to actually pinpoint certain genetic markers in people to qualify whether or not they are going to respond to certain lifestyle protocols over others.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it too is you're talking about the technology. They're adding new SNPs constantly to the results. And so, you know, you do your DNA test one time in a year or even 6 months.
It gets updated constantly.
Right. It's and for me, you know, you asked what was my motivation to start Prime. Well, one, I've always been into performance training, stuff like that, operating at my house potential. But now even more so, I want to age really well.
Longevity.
Longevity. Yep. It's different. When I was in my 20s, I just wanted to get as big as possible as a bodybuilder. Now I want to be jacked, but I want to live as long as I can. I want to have a high quality of life.
Health span. 100%.
And I want to know as much. I want to be, again, I want to be proactive about my health. So those, for me, it's the best things you can do are blood test and a DNA test, and you pair the two. I do blood work every 90 days, and then the DNA test pairs with that. But that allows me to see, hey, my ferritin is elevated for some reason, my prolactin is elevated for some reason, lets you catch things. Like with prolactin, that can be a sign of a tumor, right? So rather than waiting till you're stage whatever of this problem, you catch it on the front end, and it's easier to manage, right? Being proactive rather than strategic, again, in this, and just health. And the blood test tells you a lot about what's going on. You know, our typical panel is a 60 biomarker panel. And of course, it's going to be your hormones, testosterone, total and free, estradiol, but it's also a complete metabolic panel. So you're going to know your liver enzymes, all your lipids, cholesterols. It'll also check and see how your thyroid's working, to your ferritin, to your vitamin D level. There's so much information that's important, and you know, hopefully it's all in range. But if not, maybe there's some micro changes you can make. Maybe
the DNA test, that's where it comes in to be able to potentially pinpoint where you specifically could benefit from a specific protocol.
Well, yeah, because on the DNA test, they're going to tell you. So one thing I like about it, it tells you what diet your DNA is going to respond the best to. And for me, it's a Mediterranean diet, high protein with adequate fats, right, and moderate carbs. Well, there's all these different diets out there, and some of them work, some of them don't. Some of them work for a while, some of them don't.
Instead of experimenting with all those different ones, we can have a more educated approach as to which one will most likely work best for your genetic predisposition.
Right. And so you consider, okay, this diet is supposed to work best with my DNA structure. And then, you know, there's another marker on the DNA test says this is how your body handles cholesterol. Okay, well, let's look at the blood work. Are we reflecting that blood work? And 9 times out of 10, we are.
And I'm telling you, that's where, before we even embarked on this, I was already auditing all of my clients' blood panels, especially just the 5 basic blood markers for metabolism, especially when we're just thinking about their blood sugar, their blood pressure, their total cholesterol, whether it's HDL, LDL, their triglycerides. Like, I'm measuring and auditing that with all of my clients to begin with. But now with the DNA test, I have a more educated, from the coaching standpoint, a more data-based, educated perspective as to now what this specific protocol could look like for them, rather than having this generalized template that I used to have all my patients, all my clients, all my members now currently follow. Whereas if they had that DNA test, we would be able to be more direct in the specificity that their body would be most likely advantageous towards.
Yeah. Well, and not a lot of people do the DNA test yet. It's not cheap. I think our panel,
but it's also new.
The entry level one, I think it's like $3.99.
But it's also new, and if you can learn something about yourself, irrespective of it being $3.99, $4.99, $5.99, this is something that you're going to have for the rest of your life that is constantly updating and is one of the few ways to intimately know yourself in a way that you otherwise would have never been able to.
Well, 100%. And a lot of guys aren't even getting blood work done. Right. So, if you're just going off of how you feel and you're thinking, hey, this worked for him, I'm going to try it, your trial and error might be endless. So what the blood test does, and as well as the DNA test, allows you to approach it from a very narrowed scope, that what's specific to you, and you approach it like a sniper. Mm-hmm. So what I think I really like the DNA test, it tells you pharmacology, but also supplementation, what's going to work best for you. So in the pharmacology portion, you can literally input, on the platform, you get your DNA test back, you can input your medications you're taking, and it can give you a reference that you're going to metabolize this well, or here might be a better alternative because due to your DNA structure, that medicine's not going to work as well for you. This is another option. So that's super cool. And then also it'll tell you where you're likely deficient in certain things. Some of these things aren't going to be on a standard blood test. Like I didn't know I was prone to deficiency in selenium and choline. So I added that to my supplementation protocol.
And immediately, how'd you start feeling?
I felt better, for sure. I felt clearer minded. I felt more energy.
And you wouldn't have been able to know that if you didn't have the DNA test revealing those genetic predispositions of those insufficiencies.
And as you make these changes, it's not immediate all the time, but you'll see your biomarkers on your blood work start to come back to where the ideal range, right? So if you're wanting just to be healthier and be proactive, DNA test and blood work is crucial. But also if you're trying to perform at the highest level, whether that's business or competing in bodybuilding or a sport, these are things that if you don't have the knowledge, you're just guessing in a lot of this. You know what I'm saying? So if you really care to be the best and the healthiest, don't you want as much knowledge about what's going on internally?
And I think 100%. And I think the part we also have to emphasize is what you're really alluding to is optimization, true optimization at the individual level. Not that you're trying to be healthier or stronger than anybody around you. It's to become the healthiest, strongest, most optimal version of you. Yeah. And you can only do that by knowing these specific data points about yourself that you have to test at minimum through a blood panel.
Right. And I would say that's how we're a little different from a lot of the clinics is we are a human optimization clinic, right? We want you to perform at your best. We want, even if you're not a gym guy, I work with a lot of just business guys, high-level CEOs that they want to make sure that they're operating their highest performance. So, and that means having your testosterone, estrogen where it's supposed to be, making sure that, cognitively you're operating at that highest potential. The DNA test tells you, due to your genetics, this is your sleep window. I thought that I was supposed to get up at 4:30 in the morning because that's what successful guys do. And a lot of times I'd still get up pretty early, but my actual window is 11 p.m. to like 8 p.m. or 7 a.m. I'm sorry. And so just identifying when your body wants to be at rest and then making that a habit, you'll perform better, you'll recover better, you're going to operate at higher potential, getting your testosterone optimized, you're going to hammer through a 12, 15, 18-hour day like nothing compared to where if you were deficient.
Man.
And a lot of guys just don't know it.
But that's the thing. I can't tell you how many – I've worked with a few people. I've worked with a few executives that like work for venture capital firms, few executives that are like the CFO of a multi-million-dollar business in the sense of whether it's they're directly in the operations or they're really just managing it from afar. I've dealt with enough high-level individuals that don't realize how much higher of a level they could operate from.
Right.
It's like, bro, do you realize that the trash diet that you're on is decreasing your overall serotonergic potential, which is decreasing your ability to produce dopamine the same way, which is increasing your ability to have more cortisol in your body. And all of these things are contributing to you having more brain fog, thinking less clearly, and being less optimal in your day-to-day operations. Yeah. So being a healthier you makes you a better you in every capacity of your life. It makes you a better, and I've said this ad nauseum anytime I talk to people, being a healthier you makes you a better and healthier son or daughter to your parents. a better parent to your sons or daughters, a better friend to your friend, a better coworker to your coworkers, a better leader to your subordinates, a better subordinate to your leader. It makes you a better you in every capacity of your life.
Yeah.
And by having these things measurable, let alone like you're talking about, being able to pinpoint them and attack them like a sniper, you can then optimize not only your health, but the time in which it takes you to get optimal.
Sure. And it allows you to identify what your needs are rather than going to the local supplement store and give me one of everything,
right?
Just so you blanket it, right?
Right.
That's why I refer to the sniper metaphor, like pinpoint what you need and get that, right? But don't put a bunch of stuff in your body that you're already, sufficient
in.
Yeah. So, and what you mentioned, the high level CEOs, CFOs, what you see a lot, and I think society is getting better about it, but you see a lot of these guys sacrifice their health to gain, status or get a leg up in business.
Which isn't necessarily wrong, but is it sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the
sacrifice we had to make, right?
There's going to be a lack of balance in anybody that's
especially
starting
in the initial
something.
stages,
right? But is it true success if you're worth $10 million but you have 10 years to live?
If you're driving a Ferrari but your body is insert trash car here, there you go. I'm not a car guy, you know what I mean?
Right, and it's true because you see these guys kill themselves working. And I'll applaud it. You're working really hard, but you're neglecting other parts of your life. And your body has got to be, you can't expect a body to be a high performing machine if you're not giving it what it needs, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to build a drag car and go put 87 octane in it from Quick Trip, right? That they have the different fuel, and because that's what that engine requires. Mm-hmm. And if they put the right fuel and they put everything in that's correct, you're going to end up killing the competition. But I see a lot of guys neglect their health. Not just their health, they'll neglect their personal relationships, their faith. Their health is just one thing that is exclamation point.
Well, you're
on
saying
it.
Physical health, because I look at health as
and
all
mental,
encompassing.
100%.
Mental health, physical health, spiritual health, all of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and a lot of this stuff is going to affect the physical body, but that's just the aesthetic appearance. Having the right supplementation in place, having your hormones where they need to be, that's going to get rid of brain fog. That's going to let you focus more. Your body's just going to feel better and perform at a higher level for a longer period of time. So you can expect more out of yourself, from a physical but also mental standpoint. And when your hormones are in balance, that can affect outside of business. That can affect your personal relationships.
Man,
if your estrogen's high and your testosterone's low, you're going to have a hard time with mood stability.
Bro, I'll give you one even simpler. Think about if you're hyperglycemic and you wonder why you have impotency, you wonder why you may have libido problems. It's right. Like if you learn something as little as, if you have too much blood sugar, it's going to affect your microtubules. It's going to affect the smaller blood vessels, essentially. And then you end up realizing which part of my bodies have the small blood vessels. Oh, those parts of my bodies aren't able to receive blood the same way because of how hyperglycemic or how hyperglycemic and how hyperinsulinemic I am. Then you end up realizing, like, oh my goodness, just by changing potential inputs of an overabundance of certain foods, namely sugars in my diet, I could fix things in my relationships, like my libido problem fundamentally. Like right. That has been something that with most of those high functioning people was a common thread amongst all of them.
Yeah.
Was a libido problem that was nearly immediately fixed within 4 weeks by changing their lifestyle, namely through their dietary approach.
It's funny you mentioned libido because that's kind of, for a lot of guys, that's the final straw, right? Their cholesterol can go through the roof. Their blood pressure can go through the roof.
But if that thing
if
don't
their
work,
sexual performance falls off, okay, I'm ready to talk to somebody about it, right? Some guys are too embarrassed. But, so yeah, getting yourself healthy. You're not just getting on TRT being 350 pounds and when you should be 150 pounds, right? That's not the fix. You got to get yourself healthy first. Let your body kind of set a new normal. Mm-hmm. And then if that's deficient, then you supplement, right? Mm-hmm. So on the flip side of that, these guys that are burning it at both ends and not taking care of themselves, when they do have downtime, they'll revert to alcohol.
Self-destruction.
They'll revert to opiates, things to help them feel better because they're not feeling good,
right?
With the way they're living their life. And then to performance too. If you're not operating on a high level, next thing you know, it gets real easy to take Adderall, I've taken Adderall. It does help occasionally, but I think it's 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. At least it was in my situation. But for these guys that aren't healthy, they got to perform one way or another.
Right.
So instead of taking the time to understand their body and figuring out where the true problem lies, they're throwing things at it to counter that effect. And that's a temporary solution.
What does this go back to, though, bro? It goes back to the instant gratification. In order to get healthy, you need a level of delayed gratification because it's not an overnight process.
Sure.
And when you are already delaying gratification by not paying yourself and trying to get the business up and running and all this, we're human. And I feel like a lot of the humanity is then expressed in those situations through well, you know what? I don't get a lot of gratification instantly because of how much I'm delaying it as a businessman. So I'm at least going to get it through this outlet or this vice, the ones you were sort of alluding to.
Right.
And it's like, man, oh man, when I had those high-level executives start to really change their perception on the effort required to get healthy, they end up realizing it's not that much of an effort leap. It's really an educational thing.
Sure.
They just didn't know better.
Well, yeah, I mean, which
is why the coaching and the DNA is, I feel like, is so important, let alone with everything that Prime offers, let alone combat cardio and everything else involved. Everything we do is centered around the coaching, bro, and that's where educating people sets them up to a place where they can be self-sufficient so they don't have to wander the halls aimlessly, not really knowing where they're going.
Exactly, and it's self-sufficiency paired with efficiency, right? It's not just start dieting blindlessly, don't get your blood work and don't DNA, just try and live a healthier life.
What does that look like?
We have things to do. We need to get ourselves, it's going to take more work to get healthy than it is to pop an Adderall to make yourself perform at a high level, right? But in the long run, getting healthy is going to serve you so much better because that's such a temporary fix for that day.
Once you get healthy, I feel like it's relatively easy to maintain that healthiness.
Sure. So I think the answer is get healthy, but get as much information absolutely possible so that time where you're figuring things out is reduced down to a few months rather than a few years. Literally. And so that's, again, my main theme in life is being efficient. And that, like I said, it applies to everything. And if it comes down to understanding your body, get the Cliff Notes. It's blood work. It's DNA. It's talking to a coach. It's going over these and not just trying to figure out on your own. This gives you so much more insight to where you can sidestep this other problem, the other overcoming problems on your own, problem solving on the fly. Get as much info as you can from the get-go. That people will say, get a good mentor so that you can learn from their mistakes. Same can be applied with your health. Get the results of what's going on in your body so you identify where the problems are. You're not trying to consider fixing every single thing. You hone it down to what are the true problems. And so I really think it's, these things, supplementation, DNA, it does cost money. I mean, our program is actually for our lowest tier, I believe is $399. It's the exact same results that you get back from 10X Health, and it's $200 or $300 less. Right. So, I understand that these things cost money, but the ROI is huge. You're investing in yourself rather than, kicking the can down the road, putting a Band-Aid on something that actually needs to be addressed from what the cause is, and ultimately long-term sacrificing absolute success because you didn't take the time or were unwilling to look into what's going on, right? So if you got to look at it from point A to point Z, what's going to be the most efficient manner to get there. And occasionally you do have to do things on the fly in given situations to perform that day, but you really need to zoom out, look at it from a 5,000-foot view and say, how can I be as good as possible as long as possible? Right. And how can I get there in the most efficient manner possible?
Right. I can't tell you how the amount of value that people get out of becoming independent and knowing what to do, the amount of value that full circle comes back to the person providing that education. I used to, and I still will, but I used to spend extra time, sometimes 30 minutes to an extra hour with my clients, to the point where I would have to space them out in a way where I had I would call it a rambling block in between each session.
Yeah.
So I would give them the ability to really ask me and further educate themselves on anything that we had been talking about up to that point.
Yeah.
And I I've seen nothing short of a near 100%, I would say upwards of legit, out of 10 people, maybe only one is unwilling to actually put in the work once they're educated.
Yeah.
Because once you're educated, it's no different than Adam and Eve biting from the forbidden fruit. There is this, you now know better, so you have no choice but to be accountable for doing better.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're always going to have this underlying guilt in the back of your mind of not doing the things you know you should be doing because you now know better.
Yeah. I think knowledge is a big part of it. You're correct there. I think a lot of people, some things that you and I think are just common sense.
Isn't so common.
It's because we've lived the life for so long, right? But a lot of these folks, when it comes to working out or nutrition, they just don't even know where to start, and they say, so why bother?
Right.
So
analysis paralysis. Where do I start? I'm not going to start anywhere.
Yeah, so get this information, but then discuss it with somebody that's qualified to give you the right information. There's a lot of gurus online that maybe it's a bodybuilding contest. They've done one competition, and all of a sudden they think they need to coach the rest of the world. And their program isn't unique. They're literally what I wrote them when I prepped them. They're changing the logo and handing it off as a custom plan, right? So don't let people just convince you that they're the one that's going to provide knowledge. Make sure they have the education, and better than that, they've lived the life. Mm-hmm. So, like, I was talking to one of my trainers here yesterday, and I was telling him, like, when it comes to as a trainer, one, you are your own product. So how you look, that's one aspect of it. They want to see that you actually implement what you advise,
what you
right?
preach.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
on the flip side of that, and what you're talking about is they see you're qualified, but then they want to see, can I vibe with this person? Because it's not just the physical talk. You know, they want to talk about other things too. There's a little bit of therapy session in some of this stuff with your clients, right? So you want to look the part, but you also want to be able to be approachable and somebody that they feel comfortable talking with, because it's like when you go to your doctor, something's going on and they ask you what you're taking and you're actually doing something you shouldn't, and you don't tell them, how can you expect them to fix it?
Right.
So those people have to be comfortable with you. They have to feel that you are the person to lead them because you have the knowledge, you have the history, but they also feel comfortable enough sharing what's the truth of the matter is, right? So I tell these guys, when it comes to training, that's a critical aspect of it, but also it's the relationship is, you can't be, in those regards, you can't be a trainer or a coach and not be engaging. I tell these guys, you want to know how you win the day? The person has the most relevant conversation wins. It's not just going up and talking about the weather for 2 seconds and peacing out. It's literally talking to them and not constantly selling them on your service, getting to know them, identify what their need is. Oh, I haven't been able to lose weight, or I can't put on muscle, or I can't I can go up a flight of stairs. It's let them tell you what's going on. You got to make sure they're comfortable telling you, and they trust that you know, as a professional, what the advice would be. But then you can build that rapport. You know, there's a friendship level that comes with this too. They want to feel confident that they can trust you.
I mean, there has to be, it's too intimate of a dynamic for there not to be some sort of relationship beyond just being cordial. Like every single client or member I've worked with, they always knew they could reach out to me as something more than just a trainer. And it's because if I'm going to talk to you about why you're not following a diet or following a workout program, it has least to do with your inability and probably has more to do with your mentality and your overall approach, which then requires for me as the trainer to really dissect and try to understand where that mindset is, why it's there, and how we can improve it and move on from it.
100%.
That is such an intimate dynamic that I think people that get into this field for the right reasons are the ones that are more obvious in the sense of being able to have that dynamic versus people that just have a genetic predisposition. Maybe they were athletes and they look the part, but they don't really care to be the part.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trifecta. You have to look the part. You have to show that you implement your own teachings. You have to be a good communicator. You got to have those conversations. And then I think the third element of it that makes a successful client coaching relationship, whether that's coaching in business and health, in sports, anything, is, in addition to the other two, holding them accountable. So you have, one, they trust you that you're the right person to lead because they can see it in your own results. 2, you communicate well with them. They feel like they vibe with you. And 3, now they don't want to let you down. They have somebody that's, you need to do this, you need to be here, you need to take these things, and they don't want to let you down. So it's like, it's kind of a trifecta, because you're right. There are some stellar athletes that come out of sports and they think, I look amazing. Everybody should just want to work with me. Mm-hmm. And honestly, sometimes that's intimidating, especially when it comes to top level athletes coming in. People are like, man, I'd like to ask him a bunch of questions, but I can't go talk to him. He's so big and he hasn't even looked at me, or he hasn't even engaged me. So it's more than just knowing the information and looking the part. It's how you communicate with that person, how comfortable they feel with you. And then if those two things are in order, the accountability part comes in pretty easily, because they don't want to let you down.
Literally. I think this all full circle ties back into you talking about leadership, because at that point, as their coach, you're leading them to becoming their healthiest self. Mm-hmm. And that leadership quality, whether it's an individual or a group of individuals, starts with you first practicing those very principles.
Right.
And you've probably met a few of them. There are plenty of people that preach certain things and are nowhere near practicing the things they're preaching, yet they're good enough at maybe two of those qualities that they're able to get by, still make a living, maybe even be pretty successful. But at the end of the day, what kind of oil are they really selling?
Yeah, I mean, just because you have 50,000 followers on IG doesn't qualify you,
right?
And a lot of times that's what people go off of, right?
100%.
So, and that's one reason why we sought you out for some of the services, nutrition and DNA coaching, because I know you. I've seen you in the gyms. I've seen your track record. I've listened to your podcast. We knew you were qualified for the role, so that's why we went with it. Where, a good leader has to be a good follower first. And that's what I think a lot of people, I'm not trying to be the old guy saying this generation or whatever, but a lot of them, they start day one, and within 6 months they should think they should be CEO. And it's like, I can't put you in a leadership role if you can't follow your current leader well. You're just not going to lead well. So first you got to be able to obtain the knowledge, and that requires following a leader, and hopefully you have a good leader. Leadership is super difficult, because we're human too. Mm-hmm. I have days where I don't even want to hear it. You know what I mean? And I have some days where I want to know everything. Tell me everything. So we're human too. We have things that are pulling us in other directions. But at the end of the day, it comes with responsibility. Leadership comes with responsibility, mm-hmm. and hopefully you're led well. But you nor I would have been qualified to lead if we hadn't gone through what we had and been led by others to get to where you're at. So definitely do your due diligence on anybody you hire to help you, whether it's your business, whether it's your gym training, or just overall health. Vet them. Make sure they're good. And if it's especially in health, in the physical performance, and if they're telling you to be enhanced, they better at a minimum require blood work. Mm-hmm. Even natural athletes still need to look at their blood work. You can be predispositioned to high cholesterol and not know it if you don't do blood work. And there's certain things about your diet where if you're deficient, maybe you need iron or something like that, you're just not going to know without blood work. Then you switch that over to the enhanced coach, somebody that's competing in the NPC, mm-hmm. like I did, taking hormones and other supplements. You better require blood work during the whole process. And if that coach does not request it or require it, you better drop them in a heartbeat, because they're only caring about the product that they're presenting to the rest of the world. Right. They just want to win. Right. And the number one goal for any coach, whether it's business, health, especially in health, is that their client is taken care of. In health, that their number one goal is that that person is healthy first. Then if they want to pack on muscle and get on stage, great. But your primary focus has to be that person. A good coach wants to make sure that you get the best result possible. And if you win a show, but then you're in the hospital for a month because of liver failure or kidney failure, that's not a win. That's an absolute loss. And there's not a lot of, that's why some of the sport, bodybuilding especially, gets a bad name, because these coaches, of course, you force feed somebody 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day, and you hit them with a ton of drugs, of course they're going to get bigger. Right. But are they going to be healthy in that process? Right. It's efficiency. I can get you this big in this amount of time, but your health is going to diminish. So is that efficient? That's not. I can get you this big in that same amount of time. You're not going to be quite as insanely jacked, but you're healthy the whole time. That's more efficient, right? And then you get to that point, then you can continue to grow, but you have to have the right trajectory, and you have to have the right motives in doing so. Otherwise, if you're just getting into coaching, even in business, if you're just getting into coaching to get that fee, or to prop somebody up and say, look what I did, that you're in it for the wrong reasons. You need to be making sure that the client, the person, is getting a well-rounded, full scope win, and you're not compromising another area of their life to get them from point A to point B.
Right. I can't tell you how many times I have looked at somebody's blood panel and they have told me how they feel in contrast to what the blood panel shows.
Right.
And then when you have them go on just a subtle lifestyle calibration, how much better they end up feeling at the end of it, and how surprised they are at how much better they feel.
Right.
Because most people are operating off of at such an insufficiency that what they think is good is actually subpar to what actual feeling good is.
Well, that's the only thing they know.
That's
their normal. That's their baseline.
Right.
And so, yeah, you get everything optimized, because it's not just taking testosterone.
Right.
A lot of the things, especially all your hormones, they work synergistically.
I honestly look at almost all of that as downstream effects of the primary catalyst, which is most people's insulin resistance. Most people being insulin resistant, in my opinion, is the catalyst to the downstream effect of everything, not only hormonally, but we could talk about, we can talk about autoimmunity, hormones. We could talk about ability to recover, with the ability to even undergo sufficient muscle protein synthesis. Everything that we could talk about in terms of people's insufficiencies, I truly believe is in one way, shape, or form connected to the foundationally trash aspect of their diet that is essentially causing them to be what's known as insulin resistant, which just means they eat too much trash sugar and carbs to cause their body to be in a state where they're producing too much of this fat storage hormone that ultimately signals a bunch of other stuff downstream that is originally caused by their neglect in the food they're putting in their mouth.
Sure. And a lot of those times, especially it's easy in your 20s. You're
easy.
Younger, and you see like, well, I still look good. I'm eating like crap,
that was us to a T. I know it was me. I don't know about you, but that was me.
It was
to a T.
I'd do anything to get bigger.
Yeah. So for me, I'm eating a whole box of Pop-Tarts. I'm eating 3 bowls of jasmine rice every day. I'm just stuffing my mouth with carbs and sugar to try to put on this mass.
Right.
But again, you and I have similar body types in the sense of hard gainers. I'm a super ectomorph. So in my opinion, it was one of the first things I had to address when realizing where my bad health stemmed from, which was me trying to overcompensate for my original genetic predisposition of already having a high metabolism, not being able to put on weight. So I now had an inappropriate relationship with food fundamentally, because I looked at it as I need to gain weight and get bigger versus what is the implication of this food I'm putting in my mouth, irrespective of that output of being bigger and gaining weight.
Well, yeah, I think they're looking at the aesthetics,
right?
If that's you're getting bigger, you're performing in the gym, whatever. That doesn't mean internally things are good, right? And they, even if they're not in your 20s, in your 30s, say, well, he eats the exact same thing and his biomarkers are great. I'm like, okay, well, he may have different predisposed genetics than yours.
What does that go back to? DNA test.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think rule out the idea of I'm just gonna figure it out as I go with this stuff. That works in certain areas, not necessarily your health. Get as much information as possible, be proactive, and implement those results, and you're going to be that much better. Don't just be naive to it. Bodybuilders love it. They love to be ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. I think so. Like Dallas McCarver, I was a fan of him. They called him Big Country back in the day. He passed away, 5 or 6 years ago, but his coach just kept giving it insulin and food and GH. He kept getting bigger, and he just neglected going to the doctor. Well, he was doing a contest in Australia. I was live streaming it, and he's on stage, and he starts wobbling back and forth, and everybody comes and grabs him and shuffles him off stage, and they put him on oxygen. And about a week later, he was with Redcon at that time, Aaron Singerman, and he gave a kind of a press conference at Redcon. He said, guys, just want to apologize. I let my fans down. Just want to let you know I have an upper respiratory infection. It's no problem. It's not going to stop me. I'm going to keep rolling. Well, come to find out, after he passed away, they leaked his autopsy and his medical history, and his doctor had been telling him, you're in heart failure. you're in heart failure, and it's some symptoms of heart failure feel like pneumonia, right? And so he neglected it, and he said, "Not me. Look at me. I'm a tank. I'm a horse. You're gonna break this guy. I'm 320 pounds, right?" And then literally, I don't know how much longer. Like I want to say like a month or so later, he dies, and it's like just because you look phenomenal on the outside
doesn't mean the internal's working as phenomenally.
And don't be ignorant. Don't just out of sight, out of mind, because it's not going to change anything. No. You may just not be worrying about it,
right?
But how are you going to fix something if you neglect to address the situation?
Bro, I think the reason. So for those that don't know, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease 2 years ago, and I made a whole documentary about it, and it caused me to have to completely look at my life differently because I was more in that domain of, well, I look good, I feel good, so what is there to worry about?
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine if I had gotten a blood panel. I couldn't imagine if I'd taken a DNA test, because now that I got the DNA results, since we've had them, I realized when I first got them back that I have a terrible oxidative response to omega-6 fatty acids, which justifies the ultimate deterioration of my gut lining and my overall just my blood vessels fundamentally, because of how I was eating highly processed trash omega-6 foods, not caring about how processed and trash they were because I looked the way I looked.
Right.
And it wasn't until I had a severe autoimmune disorder cripple me to the point where I lost nearly 50 pounds in less than a month that I had to really come to terms with my lifestyle choices in tandem with what was actually happening inside my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I now realize, my goodness, my intestines are probably forever traumatized in a way where I will never be able to be as willy-nilly with food the same way I was before, because I now have such an autoimmune reaction, such a sensitivity to sugar fundamentally, but highly refined processed foods to begin with, that I'm forever changed, which I'm almost glad it happened so it didn't get as far as it could have gotten with other people, in the sense of just neglecting the internal workings of what's happening in the body.
Well, I guess at a minimum, the silver lining is it got you to take action.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a great way to put it.
And that's what a lot of people fail to do, even if they get the information, because they don't want to stop doing what they're doing. They think it's going to impede progress. Well, it's going to ultimately ruin everything if you don't take time to address it. You're just kicking that can down the road, because it's not going to get better on its own most of the time, almost never. So sometimes you have to have those experiences to make you kind of wisen up.
And I thank God every day, because I think that's exactly what it did. It just wisened me up to the hypocrisy I was living prior to that, even though I was preaching all of very similar principles that I still currently preach, just without me thinking that they directly applied to me. Because look at me. I look the way I look, and I'm performing the way I'm performing. I mean, yeah, generalization. And then I'm thinking my genetic predisposition is one where I just don't get affected by these things the same way my clients do because of my high metabolism and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Bro, I couldn't imagine if I had a blood panel, let alone the DNA test, to know my genetic predispositions before having actually endured the Crohn's flare-up at the severity that it was. I couldn't imagine how much I could have prevented and allowed myself still future freedoms that I'm now currently restricted from because of my neglect up to that point.
Well, it helps you identify the fact that just 'cause something works for one person doesn't mean it works for you.
Right.
And I realized that big time when I was going through my deficiencies and supplementation protocol with the DNA test. So for me, one thing, like I have friends that take 1 or 2 melatonin, 20 minutes, they're out. And I've always tried it. Nothing ever worked. I got to the point where I took like 9 of these melatonin.
And nothing.
And I didn't feel a thing. And the thing on the DNA test, it'll tell you I'm a hypermetabolizer of melatonin. So it's not going to have an impact on me. So that's not a good sleep aid for me. And there's some actually pros and cons to melatonin in general, not just how it affects my body. But so where something that may work great for you may not work at all for me. And if you're just going to keep putting things in your body that you're not going to respond to, you're just wasting time and money, and your body's processing something for nothing.
I think the best example is methylation, which is what the DNA test is fundamentally exposing. So for those that don't know, methylation is essentially the body's ability to turn a non-working nutrient into a working nutrient in the body. Simplest way to think about it. It's turning on things in the body to then be utilized for the body to absorb and actually practically use in its overall function. And a lot of people, I think it's upwards of 40% of Americans are unable, really anybody in the Western world, because you can account for China and India as well. We just don't have the test to really substantiate it. But their ability to methylate specific vitamins, like let's take B12, their ability to methylate B12 or even B9, like their ability to methylate these things, meaning if you took vitamin B12 or B9, if you absorbed it in your body, some people, upwards of 40%, don't have the ability in their body to cause that methylation process to then actually utilize the vitamin you took.
Right.
So if you don't understand or aren't aware of your own genetic predisposition to that poor methylation, you're potentially wasting a bunch of money on vitamins, namely vitamin B12 and vitamin B9 that you can't, folic acid, that you can't really absorb or utilize. So you're essentially just peeing it out. So you take a DNA test, you realize you have this poor methylation. So what do you then do? You take a methylated form of these supplements to ensure that you're able to properly utilize them. So you're not just literally pissing that money away.
Right. And it'll tell you there's different types of B vitamins. There's different types of D vitamins. It'll tell you which one will work better for you, which one you're going to absorb. I know I need D3 with K2, right? I didn't know that until I did the DNA test. So with the methylation, from a very elementary perspective, is anything you put in your body, you put in your mouth and processes. If you're eating potatoes, that potato doesn't stay in the potato form and flow through your veins. That your body processes that. So methylation, from a dumbed down perspective, is how your body processes things you input into your body, from when you take it down to how it exits your body and the whole process in between. And not everybody's the same, and your genetics, your predispositions determine a lot of that.
I would say the simplest way that I had a epigenetics expert describe it to me is it essentially is like an on and off switch. If you are poor at methylating vitamins or certain minerals or certain nutrients in your body doesn't have the on button, the on switch to turn it on, so you're not utilizing it.
Right.
But if you're aware of that, you can then intentionally take methylated forms of these supplements to ensure it's already, quote unquote, being able to be turned on whenever you put it in your body.
100%. So you got the double helix DNA strand where methylation is turning on or off different segments of the genes, and you do that to whatever promotes success for you or health for you.
And you can't know that unless you take a DNA test. You can't know these things unless you have a blood panel to really know what specific things you should then supplement and intentionally target, given whatever the genetic predispositions show and are revealed through the DNA test.
Right. And I'm not going to plug hard, but guys, we're in 47 states, Prime Recovery and Wellness. You can DM me, or you can go to our website, primerecoverywellness.com. And it's a super easy process. You know, generally we have a national account with LabCorp and Quest, so we would send your requisition papers to them. You show up with an ID, they do your blood draw, it takes 5-10 minutes. The results take about 5 business days. They come back to the clinic. You get on a medical Zoom call with one of the doctors or nurse practitioners. They go over your results with you. Same thing with the DNA test. We ship them the kit. You do the swab, which we probably should have done today just to show everybody.
Yeah, that's all right.
But next time. But you do a swab, you put it in the container, you send it back. The lab processes the results. It takes 2 to 3 weeks. It's a pretty involved process. The results come back to the coach in the clinic. Then you guys set up a time and you go break down all the different results that came through, and there's so many to go through all of them. So what you generally do is focus on the pain points, figure out where we can make some changes so you're truly optimized, right? So it's real easy, and just you guys just go get the blood drawn, swab the mouth. Outside of that, you don't have to do anything.
And that's where I don't think it's a shameless plug at all, bro. I think you need to understand how new and on the frontier this amenity even is for people's health discovery, in the sense that I don't think most people even know this exists.
True.
Most people aren't even aware of how much of a stranglehold they can have and how much control they can actually have on their own health outcome if only they had the tools readily accessible, which Prime Recovery offers.
Right. And you know, another barrier of entry is cost to this stuff. We're not of course, we have to be a profitable business. Otherwise, we wouldn't be.
But we're not charging it 3 to 5 times what other competitors are charging.
That's the thing. It's not, our main focus isn't always profit driven. We do that so we can keep operating, but it's really getting the client the information they need so they can live a better life. And as long as we keep producing for them, they're going to want to keep working with us. So it's a segue into our services. If you get blood work, you get DNA tests, and there's nothing we can do for you, and you're the epitome of health, awesome. Mm-hmm. But we're going to show you where your shortcomings are, and we can help you address those so you're operating at higher potential and living healthier, longer, and a higher quality life, right? So consider our cost of so just for the blood testing, for instance, it's a 60 biomarker panel. Mm-hmm. If you go to LabCorp on your own, you don't have insurance, you go in there and you order this test, it's $1,600. They charge us $199. That's what we charge the client. Right. We don't make money off this. Right. It is literally just to provide this service. And so if they do need help, then we're the guys that will help them. Right. So we don't make money off the blood work and the consult. The DNA test, we are so much more cost effective and give actually more results than the leading DNA companies out there. Mm-hmm. So like I said, this is a long play. We want to add value to people's lives where the profit point is to enough that where we can sustain the business. But we're ultimately here to support you as an individual. It's custom. It's not a one-off for everybody. Everybody's going to have some differentiating factors.
And you're going to have this information for the rest of your life. That's
exactly.
What's amazing.
Now, the blood work you want to stay up on?
The blood work you have to stay up to date on. I mean, how often do you recommend?
I do it every 90 days. Okay. At a minimum, do it twice a year.
Right. I was going to say, I usually tell people twice a year is sufficient enough to know how consistent your lifestyle has been treating you.
Yeah, just if you're an athlete and you're trying to perform at your highest level, every 90 days is probably pretty smart. But, if you're...
I deal with mainly general people. That's why for me, when I'm thinking about like the average consumer, you don't have to overcomplicate it, especially if you've at least done it frequently enough to know your baseline of where to start.
Right. Yeah. It's information. It's critical.
Mm-hmm. And the DNA test you'll have forever. Like that, your DNA, generally speaking, we can talk about epigenetics changing with the sense of things turning on and off based off lifestyle behaviors and all that, which that's a whole nother conversation we could have.
Right.
But at the end of the day, knowing your genetic predispositions, this test is essentially a one-off for you to constantly be getting updates on and constantly be continuing to educate yourself in tandem with the frontier of the science.
Sure. Yeah, guys. So if you want to get blood work done, if you get it with us, great. Just get it in general. But you can get with me. It's Matt at primerecoverywellness.com. You can get with Mitchell. It's Mitchell at primerecoverywellness.com. Blood work, DNA tests, definitely something worth investing into. Mm-hmm. You won't regret doing it. You're going to feel so much better in the short and long term, and you're investing in your health, which that's more important than any kind of bank account, any kind of amount of crypto. None of that stuff matters if you're not around to deal with
sports betting. That's another conversation.
I don't get down with it.
How many people lose money on sports? All of my buddies.
I suck at gambling.
Well, here's the thing. I don't either. But all of my buddies, when they start talking about pain points with paying for stuff, it's like, oh man, I can't afford. I immediately go, how much did you spend on sports gambling last week?
100%. Yeah, it's same thing. We have Bible study here every Thursday, and I just said that to these guys. I was like, consider these. A lot of people are making these decisions on whether they're a believer or not off of what they hear from the media and other people. They don't do their own research. They'll spend 10 hours a week researching crypto, but they won't spend 10 minutes to get into the Word and try and make their own decisions, right? So it's only the most important thing in your life. Health comes second, in my opinion. Don't you think it's worth digging into, making an educated decision?
Right.
Don't take everybody else's word for it. Why would you do that?
Right.
You wouldn't do that on most anything else in your life. Right. Why do you let everybody else tell you what's up? Get your own information for your health, for your spiritual health, and that way you have the resources so you can make an educated decision.
Take full accountability for your life. That way, when things are successful, you know who you get to give praise to. And when things are going bad, you also know who needs to keep you accountable. And at the end of the day, if you cast all that off to other people, you're going to be finding yourself in this perpetual cycle of self-destruction and self-loathing because you never really took into account to realize who's really at fault for where you're at in your life.
I agree, dude.
Look in the mirror and you'll know exactly who it is.
100%. Mitchell, where can, outside of So we got the Prime Recovery and Wellness, got that email. How can they get a hold of you for Combat Cardio?
You can go to our website, combatcardiokc.com. Everything's on the website. You can also follow me on Instagram at mitch.thompson. That's Tomson, so mitch.Thomson.
Look at that, dude.
Yeah, look, that was
that guy?
That was the Crohn's difference, bro. Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? I was 153 pounds in that picture on the left.
Wow.
And that recovery was 4 months later.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's all lifestyle. And they told me I was going to need to be on medication the rest of my life. And I took medication approximately 0 times throughout that whole journey.
I mean, and I own a health clinic, a wellness clinic. I will be the first to tell you, though, handle everything without medication as much as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. That shouldn't be your first, move.
Right. And that's also not to downplay the potential medication could have, because we could have talked all about like GLP-1s and how that can be utilized in tandem with the lifestyle to really optimize insulin resistance and getting people insulin sensitive again. We could have had a whole convo about that.
Sure.
But ultimately, yes, it's if you can't realize how much control you have before you even step into an allopathic doctor's office, you're already missing the boat on how much health optimization was left on the table.
Yeah.
And for me, when it comes to so with Combat Cardio KC, with Prime Recovery, with everything I do everything under the guise of what is the intention, what is the methodology behind whatever it is I'm embarking on. And I look at it as, if it's not holistic and actually trying to help people improve from where they were when they came in to when they eventually leave, to me, it's not really worth embarking on. Because, and I think you understand this, bro, there is an invaluable feeling and worthiness you get when you see somebody change their standard of living. When you see somebody improve their life, even by a fraction of a degree, by just having a little less stress, there is no price tag that you can put on that in terms of the fulfillment that us as coaches get from that. And so whether it's Prime Recovery and people being able to have the DNA test, the blood panel, and everything in between that Prime has to offer, whether it's Combat Cardio, because we're a brick and mortar location, Combat Cardio, located in the heart of Gladstone. So if you're locally, feel free to come check us out. First workout's free, no obligation, no commitment required. Just come check us out, see if it's something that you like. Or if it's anything that we offer online. At the end of the day, you need to find a community of people, let alone a community of people that have leadership that is actually looking out for your best interest. And in a day and age where people are just trying to sell you some snake oil and they're just trying to sell you instant gratification, it's up to you to figure out who those qualified people are. And if you don't take account for that, don't be surprised if you get sold some snake oil.
Well, and the right coach is going to be aware of all those supplementation and medication, but they also are aware of when to plug that into your protocol. It's not day one.
I'll give you an example. At Combat Cardio, what we mainly do is we offer people first the workout to see what it's like, but before they leave, they get an understanding of how they can immediately optimize their nutrition just by understanding. I should have brought a copy. That's the one thing I forgot, was bring you a copy of Healthy Made Easy. We got to get that up here. My book, Healthy Made Easy, which is just a nutrition book that I wrote 2 years ago, right around the Crohn's time, funny enough, where it's essentially helping anybody who has the standard American diet as their baseline nutrition standard, which is 80 to 90% of Americans. It's a guide on how they can get out of that unhealthy standard at bare minimum without having me over the shoulder as their coach. It's a how-to guide without having me directly. But with anybody that comes into the gym, the immediate benefit they get is understanding how can your diet look a little better before you even leave here. Mm-hmm. And then from that point forward, it's whether or not it's something they appreciate to continue that education by coming back, whether they get a membership, they just buy a copy of the book, whatever that looks like.
Right on. Yeah, I would say Prime Recovery, Combat Cardio, the gyms, the Foundation 24-hour gyms, get with the right people, obtain the right knowledge so you can make an educated decision. 100%. It's ultimately up to the person. Mm-hmm. You can only get them so far, but you're going to be dangerous with the right information. You'll 100%. Make drastic change. So, Mitch, thanks, brother.
Hey, brother, I appreciate you.
Thank you, dude.